The galleon San Felipe burned on the horizon, her masts collapsing into a furnace of canvas and tar, while Captain Erasmus Caney stood at the quarterdeck of the Serpent's Whisper and watched the smoke rise like a pillar of judgment against the Caribbean dawn. His crew roared behind him, cutlasses raised, their voices hoarse with triumph and rum, but Caney did not turn. He knew what they did not. The gold they had seized from the Spanish hold was cursed. The water casks they had plundered carried a sickness no surgeon could cure, and the route they now sailed would take them not to Port Royal or Tortuga, but to a reef charted only in the captain's private journal, a reef where ships vanished and men became whispers on the wind. He smiled, thin and cold as a knife blade, because victory was never meant to be shared. The year was 1687, and the waters between Cartagena and Havana belonged to no crown, but to those willing to spill blood for passage. If you've ever wondered what it takes to survive the Golden Age, drop your country or city in the comments and join this voyage into history's darkest waters. Caney had earned his nickname not through cruelty, but through silence. Where other captains bellowed orders and threatened the lash, he moved through the Serpent's Whisper like a ghost, his boots making no sound on the planks, his voice never rising above a whisper that somehow carried through storm and cannon fire. His crew called it sorcery. Some claimed he had made a pact with something older than the sea itself. Others believed he was a man who had died years before, and now walked the deck in borrowed flesh, held together by will and wickedness. What they all agreed upon was this: no captain alive could read wind and current as Caney could, no navigator could find prey through fog and darkness as he did, and no commander could take a Spanish treasure fleet with such precision and so little loss, until the San Felipe. The engagement had been flawless. They had approached under false colours at dawn, posing as a Dutch merchantman seeking safe passage through pirate waters. The Spanish captain had been courteous, even inviting Caney aboard for coffee and maps. Instead, Caney's men had swarmed over the rails like rats from a sinking hold, and within an hour the galleon's crew lay dead or shackled. Her cargo holds opened to reveal crates of silver ingots, barrels of cochineal dye worth more than gold in European markets, and 23 sealed chests marked with the seal of the Holy Office of the Inquisition. It was these chests that Caney's quartermaster, a scarred Welshman named Gareth Price, had insisted they leave behind. "Nothing good comes from church gold," Price had said, his voice low and urgent in the Spanish captain's ransacked cabin. "Especially not from the Inquisition. Leave it, Captain. We've enough to make every man rich." Caney had looked at him with those pale, unblinking eyes the colour of ice on still water, and whispered, "Open them." Inside each chest they found not gold but silver crucifixes, each one wrapped in cloth that reeked of myrrh and something older, something that made men gag and step back. Beneath the crucifixes lay leather-bound journals written in cipher, and at the bottom of each chest, sealed in wax and lead, were small glass vials containing a dark liquid that seemed to move of its own accord, pulsing like blood through a living vein. Price had wanted to throw it all overboard. 3 other men, including the ship's carpenter and the boatswain, had agreed. But Caney had smiled that thin smile and ordered the chests transferred to the Serpent's Whisper's hold, placed in the deepest corner where the bilge water pooled and rats would not venture. Then he had given the order to fire the San Felipe, to send her to the bottom with her surviving crew still chained below decks, their screams swallowed by the roar of flames. Now, 6 days later, those screams haunted the Serpent's Whisper, in the dark hours before dawn. The first man died on the second night. He was a Portuguese sailor named Costa, young and strong, who had climbed the ratlines during the afternoon watch and simply lost his grip, falling 40 feet to the deck. His neck broke with a sound like a pistol shot. The crew muttered about bad luck and gave him a sailor's burial at sunset. But when they rolled his body over the side, Costa's eyes were open, and in them was a look of such absolute terror that several men refused to touch him, leaving the carpenter to do the deed alone. The second death came 3 nights later. The ship's cook, a freed slave from Barbados who went by the name of Solomon, was found in the galley with his throat cut from ear to ear. The knife lay beside his hand. The ship's surgeon, a drunk Scotsman named MacLeish, declared it suicide, but the angle of the wound suggested otherwise, and the galley door had been barred from the inside. When they searched for witnesses, no one admitted to hearing a sound, though Solomon had died no more than 20 feet from where a dozen men slept in the forward berth. By the time the Serpent's Whisper passed the southern tip of Cuba, heading not toward Port Royal as promised, but into the open waters of the Florida Strait, 9 men had died or vanished. The crew grew sullen and watchful. Knives appeared at belts where none had been before. Men moved in groups, refusing to stand watch alone, and when Caney emerged from his cabin to pace the quarterdeck at night, they avoided his gaze. Gareth Price finally confronted him on the 8th day. The quartermaster climbed the ladder to the quarterdeck in full view of the crew, his hand resting on the pommel of his cutlass, his jaw set with the grim determination of a man who expects to die but refuses to go quietly. "We need to talk, Captain," Price said, loud enough that every man aboard could hear, "about our course, about the deaths, about what's in those chests." Caney turned from the rail, where he had been studying the empty horizon. His face showed no surprise, no anger, only a mild curiosity, as if Price had commented on the weather. "Speak," he whispered. "The men want to know where we're sailing. Port Royal lies west, Tortuga southwest. We're heading north into waters no sane man enters during hurricane season. They want to know why." "Do they?" "They do. And they want those chests opened and thrown overboard, or burned, or whatever it takes to stop whatever's killing us." Caney took 3 steps forward, closing the distance between them. He was not a large man. Most of the crew stood taller, but there was something in his presence that made Price step back despite himself, made the watching sailors grip their weapons tighter. "What's killing you," Caney whispered, "is fear. Fear and guilt, and the knowledge that every man aboard this ship has blood on his hands that will never wash clean. The chests have nothing to do with it. The deaths are simply what happens when men who live by violence begin to turn on one another." "That's a lie," Price said. "Costa fell. Solomon was murdered. 3 men have vanished from their hammocks in the night, leaving nothing but bloodstains. That's not guilt, that's consequence." Caney interrupted. "I told you in Cartagena we would take the San Felipe. I told you we would be rich beyond measure. I told you there would be a price. You agreed. Every man aboard agreed. The gold is in the hold, the silver, the dyes. Enough to buy estates in England, or plantations in Jamaica, or ships of your own. All of it is yours. But first, we sail where I say we sail, and we do what I say we do." "And where is that?" Price demanded. "Where are you taking us?" "To collect the rest of our payment," Caney said, and his smile returned, cold and terrible. "There's an island 3 days north, uncharted by the Spanish, unknown to the English. On that island is a settlement of men who will pay 10 times what we took from the San Felipe for what lies in those chests. After that, you're free to go wherever you please. Rich men, free men, alive men, if you can keep your nerve and your silence until we arrive." Price stared at him, and in that moment the quartermaster understood 2 things with absolute clarity. First, that Caney had no intention of letting any of them leave that island alive. Second, that there was nothing Price could do to stop what was coming. The captain had planned this from the beginning, from the moment he had proposed taking the San Felipe, perhaps from the moment he had assembled this crew in the taverns and brothels of Port Royal 6 months before. Every man aboard had been chosen not for skill, but for expendability, for the lack of family or friends who would ask questions when they failed to return. "You're mad," Price said quietly. I'm patient, Caney replied. Now get off my quarterdeck and tell the men that anyone who questions my orders again will hang from the yardarm until the gulls have picked his bones clean. That night, 3 more men died. The ship's surgeon McLeish was found drowned in a water barrel, his face purple, his fingernails torn and bloody from clawing at the wood. 2 sailors, brothers from Cornwall, were discovered in the powder magazine with their throats crushed, their bodies arranged side by side, as if sleeping. The crew was near mutiny now, but they were also terrified, and terror kept them paralyzed, kept them working the sails and manning the watches, because the alternative was to face whatever killed in the darkness, whatever Caney had brought aboard with those chests. Only Price refused to surrender. He gathered 6 men he trusted, or trusted more than he trusted Caney, and they met in the sail locker while the captain was sequestered in his cabin. They were the ship's carpenter, a massive African named Kwame, who could split a man's skull with his bare hands. 2 French brothers who had sailed with Price for years, a Dutch gunner named Van Hoff, and 2 English sailors, young but capable, who understood that their lives depended on action. We take the ship tonight, Price said. We kill Caney, throw those chests overboard, and sail for Tortuga. Any man who stands with the captain dies beside him. Agreed? They agreed. They armed themselves with pistols and axes and cutlasses, and when the ship's bell rang midnight, they climbed the ladder to the quarterdeck, expecting to find Caney alone at the rail, as he always was in the dark hours, staring at the black water as if reading messages written in the foam. But the quarterdeck was empty. The helm was lashed, the ship sailing itself on a course set by unseen hands. The captain's cabin door stood open, and from within came a soft, rhythmic chanting in a language none of them recognized, syllables that seemed to squirm and twist in the air, that made their teeth ache and their vision blur. Price entered first, his pistol raised, and what he saw there would stay with him until the moment of his death 3 days later. Caney sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by all 23 chests, each one open, their contents spread in intricate patterns across the planks. The crucifixes formed a circle. The journals lay open to pages covered in symbols that hurt to look at. And the vials, all of them, had been opened and emptied, their dark contents pooled in the center of the circle, where they moved and writhed like a nest of serpents made from liquid shadow. And Caney was smiling. "Come in, Gareth," he whispered without turning. "You and your men. I've been waiting for you." They should have fired. They should have emptied their pistols into his back and fled, should have set the ship ablaze and taken to the boats. But something held them frozen, some force that emanated from the circle, from the moving darkness, from Caney himself. They could only watch as the captain stood and turned to face them, and they saw that his eyes were no longer pale ice, but solid black, black as the vial's contents, black as the space between stars. "Do you know what the Inquisition fears most?" Caney asked, his voice still a whisper but now multiplied, as if a dozen throats spoke in unison. "Not heresy, not witchcraft, not even the devil himself. They fear what came before the devil, what slept in the deep places of the earth and the sea when the world was young. They hunt it, they cage it. They think their prayers and their crosses can contain it, but they're wrong, and I have set it free." The darkness in the center of the circle rose, flowing upward like smoke, like water, like something that was both and neither. It had no face, no form, but it had hunger, and it filled the cabin with a presence so vast and cold that frost formed on the walls, and the men's breath came in white clouds. "I offered you wealth," Caney continued, and now he was walking toward them, the darkness following, spreading like wings. "I delivered it, but wealth alone has no purpose. Wealth must be used, and you, all of you, were always the purchase price. Your lives, your souls. Your flesh and blood given freely when you agreed to raid the San Felipe, when you opened fire on her crew, when you took what the church had claimed, you consented. And now the bargain is complete." Van Hoff fired his pistol. The ball struck Caney in the chest, tearing through cloth and flesh, but the captain didn't fall. Black liquid oozed from the wound instead of blood, and Caney laughed. A sound like ice cracking in a frozen harbor. Then the darkness surged forward, and the screaming began. Price ran. The other men tried to follow, but the darkness was faster, wrapping around ankles and throats, pulling them down, pulling them back into the cabin where Caney waited with that terrible smile. Price made it to the main deck before something grabbed his leg. Something cold as seawater in winter, strong as anchor chain. He fell hard, his pistol clattering away, and as he was dragged backward toward the cabin, he saw the rest of the crew, 30 men, more, all standing motionless at their posts, their eyes glazed, their mouths slack, already lost. "You can't," Price gasped as he was pulled through the cabin door. "You can't! The island, the settlement." "There is no island," Caney said gently, kneeling beside him. "There is no settlement. There is only the deep, and the old things that dwell there, and the payment that must be rendered. I told you there would be a price, Gareth. I told you from the beginning." "Why?" Price managed. "Why do this? Why any of it?" "Because I died a long time ago," Caney said. "Died and drowned and was remade by something that needed hands to work, eyes to see, a voice to command. I am its instrument. You and your crew are its meal. And when the last of you is gone, I will find another ship, another crew, and the cycle will continue, forever, or until the seas themselves run dry." The darkness took Price then, and his final thought was not of treasure or freedom, but of his mother's voice, singing to him when he was small, in a cottage in Wales, so far from these cursed waters that it might as well have been another world. By dawn, the Serpent's Whisper was empty. 43 men had sailed aboard her from Cartagena. Now only Caney remained, standing at the helm, his hands steady on the wheel, his black eyes fixed on the northern horizon, where storm clouds gathered like vultures. The chests had been sealed and returned to the hold. The cabin had been cleaned. Even the bloodstains were gone, washed away by water drawn from the sea, water that whispered and laughed in languages forgotten before men learned to build ships. The vessel drifted for 3 days, following currents that led nowhere and everywhere, until she ran aground on a sandbar off the Florida coast during a hurricane that tore her masts away and split her hull. When Spanish salvagers found her 2 weeks later, they discovered the cargo intact: silver, dyes, and 23 sealed chests bearing the mark of the Inquisition. But of the crew, they found no trace, no bodies, no bones, no sign that anyone had been aboard when the ship died. They towed the wreck to Havana. The cargo was inventoried, the chests returned to the church with full ceremony and prayers for the souls of the lost. A report was filed describing the Serpent's Whisper as a pirate vessel, possibly English, possibly Dutch, captained by a man whose name appeared in no registry and whose face matched no wanted poster in the colonies. The matter was closed. The ship's timbers were burned as a precaution. The silver was melted down. The dyes were sold at auction. But the chests were never opened again. They were placed in a vault beneath the cathedral in Havana, sealed with blessed wax and iron locks, and there they remained for 60 years, until an earthquake in 1749 collapsed the vault and buried them under stone and mortar. When workers cleared the rubble, they found the chests had vanished, leaving only stains on the floor, dark stains that resembled the shape of a man spreading his arms wide, as if welcoming something vast and terrible. In Port Royal, in Tortuga, in Charleston and Cartagena, and along every waterfront where sailors gather and rum flows, the tale of the silent captain became legend. Mothers used it to frighten children into obedience. Captains told it to new crews as a warning against greed and blasphemy. Some versions said Caney had been a demon from the start. Others claimed he had found a Spanish curse and paid its price. A few whispered that he still sailed, that on moonless nights you could see the Serpent's Whisper on the horizon, her torn sails full of wind that came from no earthly sky, her decks empty save for one man at the helm, smiling. What no version of the tale mentioned, what no witness dared speak aloud, was the logbook found in Caney's cabin by the salvagers. Its final entry written in a hand so precise it might have been printed by a press. I smiled at victory, knowing my crew was already lost. But victory was never the point. The point was the smile. The point was knowing. The point was choosing once again to serve what can never be satisfied, what can never be contained, what will hunger until the last ship sails and the final sailor drowns. I am Erasmus Cain. I was a man. I am now something else, and I will return. The logbook was burned the same day it was found, but 3 sailors who glimpsed its pages swore until their deaths that beneath the final entry, written in that same mechanical precision, were the names of every man aboard the Serpent's Whisper, along with the dates and methods of their deaths, listed weeks before any of them occurred. A perfect accounting, a fulfilled prophecy, a captain who had always known, from the moment he assembled his crew, exactly how their story would end. On the reef where the Serpent's Whisper went down, divers occasionally find pieces of the wreck, a bell, a cannon, shards of pottery, but they never find bones, they never find the chests. And sometimes, when the current shifts and the water grows suddenly cold, they report seeing a figure standing on the sandy bottom, arms outstretched, mouth open in a silent scream or silent laughter. They can never be certain which. The figure wears the remains of a captain's coat. Its eyes are holes filled with darkness, and it points, always points, toward deeper water, toward places where the charts end and the old things wait, patient and hungry and endlessly, eternally awake.